Night had fallen in perfect silence, the kind that feels almost intentional, as if the world itself were holding its breath. Nothing moved, nothing warned, and nothing suggested that within minutes, an ordinary moment would split open like a wound across the sky. People slept, machines hummed, the streets were calm, and the air carried the illusion of safety. Yet beneath that stillness, danger was coiling in the dark, unseen and unimagined, waiting for a single spark to reveal its true shape. This was the final quiet before reality fractured, before alarms could scream or reason could catch up. A flash would rise, a roar would tear through steel and certainty, and history would pivot on a second no one could predict. That night, a place built on pride and progress would become the stage for a disaster unlike anything the world had faced. And when the first light appeared, brilliant, violent, terrifying, the world did not understand it was witnessing the moment everything began to change. In that instant, silence surrendered to chaos, and the future shifted beyond anyone's imagination forever. Before the catastrophe carved its mark into history, the region stood as a symbol of growth, ambition, and quiet confidence. It was a place shaped by human optimism, a landscape of orderly streets, new buildings, and lives unfolding with the comforting rhythm of routine. Families built their futures there, believing in progress and stability. Children filled the parks with laughter, bicycles flashed past rows of modest apartments, and evenings carried the warmth of conversations, drifting through open windows. Everything felt steady, predictable, almost proudly ordinary. But beneath the surface of this peaceful facade lay a complex system, powered by a technology that promised wonders, yet demanded an understanding far deeper than those in charge were willing to consider. Experts had raised concerns, subtle at first, then increasingly pointed, about the weaknesses hidden within the heart of the operation. Most warnings were brushed aside, too inconvenient, too disruptive, too easy to ignore. Pride swelled where caution should have lived. Life continued unbothered, untouched by the tension growing in technical reports and whispered conversations among engineers. To the people who lived and worked there, the future seemed bright and secure. They could not know that the foundation of their safety was already cracking, that the smallest mistake might awaken a sleeping threat capable of unraveling everything they cherished. Deep within the machinery that powered the region's confidence, a quiet flaw waited, small enough to overlook, yet powerful enough to rewrite history. The system had been designed with ambition, built to demonstrate technological strength and national pride. On paper, everything appeared efficient, elegant, and dependable. But in reality, the design carried weaknesses that only a few fully understood, and even fewer dared to confront. For years, engineers had observed strange behaviors, unstable reactions during low-power operations, unpredictable surges, and warning signs that appeared during routine tests. Reports were written, suggestions made, and concerns raised in meeting rooms, where the air felt as heavy as the responsibility the workers held. Yet change never came. Every alarm was softened by bureaucracy, every risk reduced to a footnote, every fault dismissed as a minor inconvenience. Speed mattered, deadlines mattered, reputation mattered, caution did not. Those who worked closest to the machines felt an unease that lingered behind their daily tasks, but they continued forward, trusting that someone above them understood the system better than they did. Meanwhile, the flaw remained, quietly gathering potential, like pressure building beneath locked steel. No one imagined that this overlooked weakness, this single imperfection buried in a web of valves, pipes, and calculations, held the power to bring an entire landscape to its knees. It was not a question of if, only a question of when, and the answer was approaching faster than anyone believed. The night that would unravel everything began without ceremony. Inside the control room, tired technicians moved through their routines with the steadiness of people who had done the same tasks hundreds of times before. A safety test was scheduled, simple on paper, almost mundane in purpose. It was meant to last only a short while, just long enough to confirm that the system could produce the electricity needed in an emergency. Nothing about it seemed dangerous. Nothing suggested that the smallest misstep could ignite catastrophe. Yet the flaw that had slept for years was no longer quiet. As the operators lowered the reactor's power, the system responded unpredictably, slipping into unstable territory. Instruments flickered, numbers drifted outside expected ranges, and subtle warnings crept across the panels like shadows. Still, the test continued. Orders were orders, and hesitation felt like failure. Communications grew tense. Questions were asked too late, decisions made too quickly, and procedures bent to meet demands that should never have been imposed. Each minute tightened the coil of risk. Valves resisted. Pressure climbed. The reactor strained under conditions it was never meant to endure. Then, in a moment too short to grasp, the situation crossed a point of no return. Power surged uncontrollably, rising far beyond safe limits. Metal groaned, heat spiked, and the core entered a violent chain reaction. What followed would tear apart the illusion of safety and change the world before anyone had time to understand what was happening. At 1:23 a.m., the world changed in a single, blinding instant. It began with a sound deep, violent, and impossibly sudden, as if the earth itself had been struck by a colossal force. The control room shook, lights burst. The floor trembled under the weight of a shockwave that tore through concrete and steel with merciless precision. Within seconds, the reactor's core, pushed beyond every physical limit, exploded with the fury of a trapped sun breaking free. A blinding flash shot upward, ripping open the night sky. It was white at first, pure, sharp, unnatural, then quickly shifted into a swirling pillar of orange fire and black smoke. The roof of the building was hurled into the air like paper thrown aside by a giant's hand. Burning graphite and debris rained down, scattering across the grounds in glowing fragments that hissed as they struck the asphalt. But the most terrifying element was the one nobody could see. Invisible particles, lethal, silent, and merciless, rose into the air and drifted outward, carried by the wind like a poisonous breath. The explosion had released a storm of radiation that no human instinct could detect, and no training had prepared anyone to face. Workers staggered through the darkness, unsure whether they were witnessing a malfunction, an accident, or something far beyond comprehension. The glowing edges of the shattered reactor illuminated their faces with an eerie light. Smoke poured upward in twisting waves, and within that smoke, death traveled quietly, spreading across the sky as the world slept. Unaware that history had just been rewritten in fire, the first responders arrived within minutes, unaware that they were walking into one of the deadliest environments ever created by human hands. To them, it looked like a simple industrial fire, dangerous, yes, but familiar. Flames rose from the shattered building, debris crackled under their boots, and the air shimmered with heat. No alarms warned them of radiation. No orders mentioned danger beyond the blaze they could see. Firefighters rushed forward, dragging hoses through the glowing wreckage. Some picked up chunks of burning graphite with their bare hands, not knowing that these blackened fragments pulsed with radiation strong enough to kill within hours. They felt the heat, but not the invisible burn sinking silently into their skin. Many noticed a strange light above the ruins, a bluish glow dancing in the smoke, beautiful and haunting, like a curtain of northern lights drifting over the wreckage. One firefighter whispered, "It's glowing. How can it glow like that?" He did not know he was staring directly into ionized air, illuminated by lethal radiation pouring out of the exposed core. Minutes passed, and the men began to cough, stumble, feel their throats tighten. A metallic taste spread across their tongues. Their skin reddened as if scorched by an unseen sun. Still, they fought on, determined to control a fire that could not be controlled. They were brave, determined, tragically unprotected. And in those first moments, as the invisible enemy seeped deeper into their bodies, many of them were already facing the final hours of their lives without knowing it. While chaos unfolded at the plant, the city nearby remained wrapped in its usual morning calm. Windows glowed softly as families prepared for another ordinary day. Children pulled on their school clothes, half asleep, and unaware that a toxic cloud was already drifting silently above their rooftops. No sirens echoed through the streets, no warnings broke the routine. The air looked clear, the sky seemed harmless, and life continued with the gentle rhythm of a peaceful Sunday. But subtle signs soon began to emerge. Some people felt sudden headaches, sharp and unfamiliar. Others complained of nausea that came without reason. A strange metallic taste spread across the tongues of those walking through the early morning light. Few paid attention. These symptoms felt too vague, too random, too easy to dismiss. Parents took their children to the park, couples strolled along the river, and kids lined up for a ride on the Ferris wheel that overlooked the quiet city. All the while, invisible radiation coated benches, rooftops, and playgrounds like an unseen dust. Birds fell from the sky without explanation, collapsing onto sidewalks where puzzled residents stepped around them. Leaves on certain trees began to curl and discolor, their change so sudden it seemed unnatural. Yet even as unease grew, no one knew the truth. The silence from authorities remained unbroken, and the people, unknowingly standing in harm's path, continued their day as if nothing extraordinary had happened, living, breathing, and smiling in the shadow of a danger no human senses could detect. For more than a day, the city continued in fragile normalcy, unaware that every hour spent under the drifting cloud carved deeper risks into their future. Only after 36 long hours did the authorities finally break the silence. Without warning, loudspeakers crackled to life across the streets, carrying a calm, almost mechanical voice that betrayed nothing of the danger. Residents were instructed to prepare for temporary evacuation. They were told to gather essential items only. They were promised they would return in 3 days. Buses rolled into the city in long, solemn lines, bright yellow vehicles that looked strangely out of place against the growing tension. Families gathered beside them, clutching bags hurriedly packed with documents, photographs, and a few pieces of clothing. Children held their toys tightly, confused by the urgency around them. Many people left meals unfinished on their tables and laundry half-folded on chairs, expecting to be back before the week ended. As the engines rumbled to life, some glanced back at their apartments, never imagining it was their last glimpse of the homes they had built with so much hope. Pets were left behind, gardens were abandoned, windows remained open, curtains swaying in the breeze as if waving farewell. Within just a few hours, the city emptied. Streets once filled with life fell silent, the echo of footsteps replaced by an eerie stillness. Prams, bicycles, and belongings lay scattered, frozen in the moment everyone left. Pripyat, or any place like it, did not die with a roar, but with the quiet departure of its people, leaving behind a ghost city shaped by the promise of return that would never come. As buses carried families away, another group moved in the opposite direction toward the burning remains of the reactor. They were soldiers, firefighters, engineers, and volunteers whose lives were suddenly bound to a mission few could fully comprehend. They would later be called liquidators, a name that hinted at their impossible task: to liquidate, contain, and suppress a disaster that defied human understanding. Most arrived with minimal protection, thin suits, basic masks, ordinary boots. None of it was enough. They faced radiation levels strong enough to overwhelm instruments, capable of inflicting lethal damage in seconds. Yet they continued forward, driven by duty, orders, or the unshakable belief that others' lives depended on their actions. Some were sent onto rooftops littered with radioactive graphite. Their job was simple in instruction and deadly in execution. Pick up the burning pieces and throw them off the edge to clear space for helicopters. Each man was allowed only 60 to 90 seconds on the roof. That was all the human body could survive. They moved quickly, working with tremors in their hands and terror behind their eyes, knowing every second shortened their future. Others worked in tunnels beneath the reactor, battling suffocating heat as they dug to prevent a second explosion. Many tunnel workers stripped down to their underwear just to endure the unbearable temperatures, their bodies coated in dust and determination. They never asked how much danger they faced. They already knew. The liquidators fought with shovels, bare hands, and sheer resolve. They were not armed with advanced tools or scientific certainty, only courage deep enough to face the invisible enemy that seeped into their bones. Their sacrifice would save countless lives, even as it cost many of them their own. Even after the first explosion, the nightmare was far from over. Beneath the wreckage, molten nuclear material continued to burn through structures designed to contain it. If it reached the pools of water beneath the reactor, a second explosion far larger than the first could have torn through the region with apocalyptic force. Entire cities might have vanished. Millions could have been exposed to lethal radiation. Europe itself lay vulnerable. Authorities understood the stakes, and the race against time began. Helicopters thundered overhead, dropping sand, boron, and clay into the blazing crater below. Each flight passed through a column of rising radiation, exposing pilots to doses no human should endure. Some flights were successful, others ended in tragedy. One helicopter clipped a crane cable hidden in the smoke, spinning wildly before crashing beside the reactor, killing the crew instantly. Their sacrifice barely made the reports, swallowed by the chaos of the unfolding disaster. Meanwhile, Teams of miners worked in the depths below the plant, carving a tunnel meant to stop the molten core from reaching groundwater. They dug under unimaginable heat, wearing little more than helmets and determination. Air felt scarce. Water dripped from the walls in slow, mocking taps, but the miners kept going, driven by a simple truth. If they stopped, millions would pay the price. Above them, engineers struggled to brace collapsing structures, while soldiers cleared radioactive debris. Every task demanded bravery. Every mistake carried the weight of catastrophe. Together, their efforts prevented the second explosion. The world feared a disaster that might have redrawn the map of Europe. Their work did not erase the tragedy, but it stopped a far darker future from becoming reality. Far beyond the borders of the disaster zone, the world remained unaware of the invisible threat drifting silently across the sky. Winds carried radioactive particles over forests, rivers, and entire nations. In the early hours, nothing seemed unusual. But then, hundreds of kilometers away, radiation monitors in foreign power plants began to scream with alarms. Confused technicians searched desperately for leaks in their own facilities, only to discover the truth. The danger was coming from somewhere else. One by one, countries across Europe detected the abnormal readings. In Sweden, Norway, Poland, Germany, and beyond, scientists pieced together the pattern, tracing the contamination back to the same origin. While officials demanded answers, silence echoed from the source of the crisis. The scale of the disaster, impossible to hide, was beginning to unfold across borders. Governments scrambled to act. Schools closed their doors. Farmers were ordered to keep livestock indoors. Children were told not to play outside. In some regions, store shelves emptied as parents searched for bottled water and safe food. Fresh vegetables were banned. Milk was poured down drains. Parks and playgrounds, once filled with laughter, became deserted. Yet fear spread faster than any official statement. Rumors filled the void left by delayed information. People watched the sky with unease, wondering whether the air they breathed carried a danger no one could see. The disaster was no longer a local tragedy. It had become a continental alarm, one that revealed just how fragile borders were when faced with a threat carried by the wind. As the fires faded and the smoke thinned, the true magnitude of the disaster began to reveal itself, not in explosions or collapsing structures, but in the slow, relentless toll on life. Radiation did not strike with the sudden force of the blast. It worked silently, carving invisible wounds that surfaced days, months, and years later. Hospitals filled with firefighters, soldiers, and workers who had rushed into the disaster zone. Their symptoms appeared quickly: violent vomiting, blistering skin, fevers that refused to break, and fatigue so deep it felt like their bodies were shutting down from within. Many never recovered. For countless others, the consequences unfolded over time. Thyroid cancers surged among children exposed to contaminated milk. Leukemia and tumors became tragically common, affecting people who had once lived ordinary, healthy lives. Families watched loved ones grow weaker, grasping for explanations wrapped in scientific terms that offered no comfort. The environment bore its own marks. Forests near the blast site turned a rusty red, as if the trees had been burned from the inside. Animals showed mutations, some subtle, others disturbingly clear. Entire villages became uninhabitable, their fields overgrown, their houses collapsing under the weight of abandonment. Generations born after the disaster still felt its shadow. There were questions about long-term genetic effects, concerns etched into every medical checkup, every unexpected illness. The scars left behind were not just physical, they were emotional, psychological, and deeply human. Chernobyl's legacy, or any tragedy like it, was a reminder that a moment's failure could echo across decades. Time could soften memories, but it could not erase the marks radiation had left on bodies, landscapes, and hearts. Years after the evacuation, when the exclusion zone had become a forbidden landscape of silence and decay, something unexpected happened. A handful of residents, mostly elderly men and women, returned to the abandoned villages they had once called home. They came quietly, carrying small bags, old memories, and a simple determination. They would rather die in their own houses than live as strangers elsewhere. Their homes stood cracked and overgrown, yet to them they were familiar sanctuaries. They rebuilt gardens, repaired fences, and reopened wells that had not been touched in years. Chickens wandered through empty yards, goats grazed beside rusted tractors, and smoke once again curled from chimneys that had long gone cold. These people lived simply, planting potatoes, gathering mushrooms, and drinking milk from their own animals, despite warnings that the land was still contaminated. Strangely, many of them remained healthy far longer than anyone expected. Scientists arrived to study them, puzzled by how these residents could survive in a place abandoned for its danger. Some believed it was resilience, or genetics, or sheer luck. Others thought it was something deeper, the power of home, of routine, of belonging. In the heart of the exclusion zone, surrounded by memories and silence, these people proved that even in places marked by tragedy, life could take root again, not perfect, not safe, but undeniably alive.